No, we're not. We're just going recording, right?
Yeah, we're going recording. Yeah, I don't do live. Too
Yeah.
embarrassed. So Wanda Klopp, how do I say your last name? Help me out. Klopp,
Cluff. Cluff.
right?
Off the cuff with an L. Cluff.
Klopp,
It's German.
Klopp. What's the
hmm
origin of that? Oh, is it German? Nice.
German means to
Well,
knock.
Wanda, nice to finally get together with you on this thing. To knock,
Yeah.
like to knock people's heads together, make everybody aware you're there.
Yeah. Make them listen or sell them something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I met. So tell me about yourself. I mean, I met you regarding water and water quality, and you've got some big operation going down there in the with your website and your group. Um, tell the world a little bit about your group. What got you started? What you're doing, and what prompted you to get into this thing.
Well, after I saw all my friends in nature dying at the beach by the millions, I knew that there was something seriously wrong with the environment that would kill such a diversity of creatures in the ocean. And right on the beach in Naples, Florida, and it extended 120 miles to the north and to the south, including Everglades City, which actually encompassed the beachfront. Where the mangroves are, there's no accountability. There's nothing there to report on what's going on. So really, we only had the local resources for 120 miles to see that there's something seriously wrong going on in the Gulf of Mexico. And being a serious water lover, I mean, everything except for water skiing, I love about being in the water. And when I saw everything get poisoned, I was like, wow, well, if it's poisoning all and killing all the animals, can't it do that to us too if we're out there? And so that sent me on a search to find out what's going on, what's killing these creatures, because I had heard for years that it was just red tide, which is an organism called Carina brevis that causes red tide. So I learned about that. And then I found the group that I now help moderate on Facebook, called South Florida Clean Water Movement. And I found them and I started hanging out with them. I did a protest with them and really learned a lot. And then I thought, I don't think that it's just one thing. It just seemed to me that it was just too devastating what was going on. So then I continued searching. I did water testing. I became a waterkeeper ranger. And what I found out was pretty devastating. It told me that I better stay out of the water. And I also learned that people had learned as much as I did, still went in the water. And to each his own. Everybody has that freedom. But I also felt a strong calling to not give up on nature down there, to make a strong effort towards finding solutions to the problems. And so here I am. And now I'm going to try and do it, get the word out and share this information in a different format with you, Tim Tucker.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. Um, what I guess what caught my eye some years ago were the algae blooms. I heard about red tide, and I want to talk about that in a second because I don't really understand what it is. And what it does, but I've heard it's horrible. I've never seen it, but I have seen the algae blooms. And so when you started, you became associated with your group. You said you became a ranger. I mean, what does a ranger do for that? And
Water. Well, a
do you have a
waterkeeper ranger. What I
badge? You get to carry a little.
no, you just become um, li- a water tester. I just go out and collect samples of water, send them to the lab,
Okay.
and have them tested for whatever chemicals or sewage, bacteria that you're looking for. That's what a waterkeeper ranger does, and it's associated with the Waterkeeper Alliance that Kennedy began.
Okay. Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr.
RFK
Or
Jr.
which Kennedy?
Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr.,
Oh,
who's running for vice president right now. The Waterkeeper Alliance is his baby, I think.
is so he started that, and then
Yes.
didn't that all kind of start up north where their compound is, or I don't even know where it is, Martha's Vineyard,
Mm,
or does he have
well,
a Florida connection as well?
well, he just started the organization Waterkeeper Alliance, and it just spread kind of like a. Um, I can't think of what the word I want to call it, but anyways, yeah, that calls for an edit.
So when you take these waters, okay, well when you do samples, where do you send the samples to, and who pays for the lab work?
Well, my
Who
personal
pays
advice
the lab to run the tests?
yeah, my personal advice is to send it out of state. I think the samples that I did and took financial responsibility for, I sent to Georgia. Um, but there's a lot of great labs in Florida, and of course there's University of Miami. I hand delivered some 6 foot samples, core samples of the Peace River over there, and anyways, that's what you do. You just get samples and test for what's in there. It's a per item. The big picture is, though, it's a per item cost. So like there might be 30 things you really want to test for in a sample, but it costs you, $10 per item to get results. Depending on what you're looking for. Which a lot. I tested for radon,
So you as
radium.
a ranger have to write, you and your, but you had to pay for your own test results or your own
Not
lab
as a
samples?
ranger. No, not as a ranger. This was before I became a waterkeeper ranger. This was when I was independently trying to find out what was going on. And I found a girl that was doing
Okay.
testing, and I helped her, and I did some collections, and just to give myself a peace of mind. Um, was there really something other than the red tide, the Carina brevis, that was causing these issues? Or, I just needed a culmination of what was going on. I needed a few answers, and the water testing gave me just opened up a
So
whole new
what did you
ball
find?
game.
What,
Well, one of the
but
major
then you said
things.
you did core samples too. So I mean, you're
Yeah, well, yes. The Peace River Waterkeeper collected some core samples, and I delivered them over to the University of Miami. But we were never privy to the information from those core samples. But some of the samples that I was privy to, I were ones that I collected and helped pay for, and I helped collect, and that those had to do with the beach water. And you know what I found out was that the
Sure.
radon levels when you're sitting at the beach is as high as a home basement where the radon's tested, and it's so high that it would
Yeah.
require remediation. Our beaches
How do you
way off.
remediate a beach?
You don't,
How would you
but
ever even
but
go
you
about
you're risking your
solving
health.
that on the
You're,
beach?
you can't, but you're risking your health if you're sitting on the edge of the beach for extended periods of time, or if you're swimming in the water and inhaling all that radon. I mean, that was my take on it. I'm no scientist, but I thought this is crazy. And you know what else resonated with me was a lot of the mammals that we saw float on shore and that I have pictures of. I was like, why are they black? Why is their skin look like it's cooked? You know, uh, I don't know. There's way more questions than answers that I ever found out. But the one answer I did find out was that I didn't think for me it was safe to go in the water anymore.
So let's talk about algae for a second, or the algae blooms. Not for a second. This is kind of what prompted my whole avenue of my life right now, are these algae blooms, and not just in the coastal waters, but in the riverways and tributaries. And I've even seen it in inland lakes and ponds and rivers up north. But what's causing those? And because I mean, I've seen videos recently of Florida, the algae blooms are ridiculous. I can't believe how bad they are.
Yeah. And they're very dangerous.
What's
You
going
know,
on with that?
well, algae's been around since the beginning of time. In fact, it's probably the beginning life forms were algae. And this is just what I've learned. And but what has happened is that biodiversity of the waterways is upset by the nutrients available, and also by the animals that disappear, that get killed, changes the biodiversity and raises up certain levels of creatures while others become non-existent in the water columns. So it's kind of hard for me to explain that, but then there becomes an overabundance of algae. The algae keeps growing, and as long as there's something for it to eat, it continues to grow, and it'll kill everything that it can find. And usually the bloom, which it blooms and then that kills more creatures, and then until there's nothing left for it to eat, and then it will go back and crawl into whatever cave it exists in when it's not blooming, when it doesn't have the nutrients it needs. And the nutrients it needs are usually the small stuff that is hard to see in the water, fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, um, phosphate chemicals, nitrogen from sewage. Those are the big ones. Probably sewage and phosphate chemicals. They love that stuff. It makes them grow. It makes everything grow. That's algae.
And then does the algae consume? Does it consume oxygen out of the water too? I mean, does
Yeah,
algae?
yeah. It will deplete the water of oxygen because of its requirements. But when it's so concentrated in an area, it will deplete the water of oxygen and thereby starving the creatures in that water of oxygen also. And then they die, and then the algae has more to eat. So the algae's goal and is to provide food for its existence, and it does that by killing things itself with its toxins or by removing oxygen out of the water.
Um, hang on a second. So does that when the algae blooms? And I mean, I've seen pictures recently where it just looks like almost a piece of carpet across these waterways of these canals. And if it blooms and it consumes all this oxygen, is that what leads to these fish kills that we see all over the place? Or just huge masses of this recent thing called spinning
Hey,
fish?
well, my understanding is that there's a couple
Beg your
different
pardon?
ways algae can kill. It can remove the oxygen and suffocate the fish. They no longer can breathe. But it is also like cyanobacteria is a neurotoxin, so it can paralyze. It causes ALS in people, which is a paralyzing disease. Um, it can, the last to go is your lungs. I mean, you can be
Isn't that
paralyzed
the
by
baseball player's disease? What
Lou Gehrig's disease, yes. But what it
is that?
does is
Yeah, Lou
slowly
Gehrig's. Yeah.
paralyzes you. It slowly paralyzes you till the last thing you have is your last breath. That's how dangerous it is.
What a horrible way to go. So you're saying that the algae blooms, if we go swimming in the waters that have all that stuff, disease or all kind of other things?
Yes. Dogs, if a dog walks in cyanobacteria and gets it on its paws and then licks its paws, it can kill him just like that. It can be very deadly. They found samples of algae growing in the bisections of dolphin brains. It was growing in their brains. And this is a neurotoxin.
What does that do to the dolphins?
Well, if it paralyzes humans, I imagine it probably paralyzes dolphins.
Am I remembering correctly that there's been several spells of like large numbers of dolphins washing ashore, along with even whales? Because aren't dolphins a mammal? And they're
Yes.
air breathing.
And yes, and manatees too. In 2018 to 2020, that year and a half period there was probably 1,000 dolphins maybe that washed on shore and 1,000 manatees, or 1,000 turtles, definitely 1,000 manatees, but 1,000 sea turtles. I mean, large sea turtles. They were numbering, and we were getting photos of them, and then we quit seeing the numbers on the backs of the turtles after a while. It was very disheartening to see 1,000 dead sea turtles, big ones, I mean, 4 6 feet across. And the manatees, of course, and dolphins. It was devastating to me. I'm thinking, if it's killing all these, what's it doing to the
I mean,
people?
turtles are air
Uh,
breathing as well, so I don't know. Are they considered a mammal?
well, yeah, the oddest thing is that my whole life down there in Florida, we'd go to the beach, and it might be red tide, but it's Sunday. We got our picnic basket, we have our drinks, and we sit on the beach, and there's dead fish. It stinks. We cough and drink our drinks and eat our lunch, among all this dead fish. And you think, I mean, I think now, where else in society would you sit among dead animals and consume a lunch and enjoy a cocktail among dead animals? I mean, it's just crazy.
I don't know. I'm kind of thinking of Mumbai or some other third world country where they do that and they don't even give another thought to it. So, what do you think? We talked about algae and what what causes it to bloom, and you mentioned excess nutrients, and that's kind of what I've read. And one of the things that I've kind of focused on is what I call chemical runoff, but it's just runoff from nitrogen. I mean, where does all this nitrogen or phosphorus and come from that's going into the Gulf? And by the way, my understanding is it's happening all over the planet. It's not just the Gulf of Mexico. I watched that article or that YouTube show the other night that I shared with you, and it's in Germany, it's in Italy, it's in um, Australia. It's happening all over the planet. But the Gulf of Mexico is a unique body of water, as far as I'm concerned, where it's kind of wrapped around with landmass and a lot of agriculture. So, who's the bad guy here? What's causing this? And has this always been happening, as far as you know, or is this a relatively new phenomenon?
I'm gonna. Well, human population has a lot to do with it, and the needs of human populations. We need food, so they use millions of tons of chemical fertilizers to grow millions of tons of food. And 25% minimum of these fertilizers end up in the waterways. So that's just a lot of nutrients that help the algae grow. The algae is like grass. I mean, it lives off of micronutrients.
Yeah, it wants to be fed, right? I mean, the more you feed it, the more it grows.
Yeah, until it runs out of food. It does not subside until it is out of food. And that includes all the animals are dead. And that's what happens along the beaches. Here's this big algae bloom and it keeps eating and killing till it's 100% dead. And I have seen it dead down to the sand dollars in 2019. The sand dollars even died.
So when you say the beaches, and let's just call that the Gulf, I mean, how many rivers run into the Gulf of Mexico? Is there a number? It's got to be lots and lots of them. I mean, from Louisiana, Texas, all the way over to the south of Florida.
Oh yeah,
And
there's probably a river, uh, the mouth of a river every 20 miles perhaps along the Gulf Coast. 20, 30 miles, there's a river
wow,
entering the Gulf.
I mean,
A
when I
lot.
was younger, we used to hang around where the Sabine River. Yeah, well, where the Sabine River when it ran into the Gulf. I grew up on the Sabine River, like, I don't know, 250 miles north of the Gulf, and we never took a boat all the way, but we spent a lot of time in the Sabine, and it's I just love rivers. But there's a lot of agriculture. That whole stretch of the Gulf of Mexico, they grow a lot of things, whether it's hay or cash crops or well, cattle, which is hay. Um, I would imagine that there's just an awful lot of excess chemicals that run off into the Gulf of Mexico.
Yep. Yep.
And
There.
some of these things I've been seeing about Florida is the canals and the river, all these canals that they built. Some of them are just again they look like they have artificial turf across the top of the water. It's so thick with algae. How do people live in that stuff?
Well,
I
they're
would think it'd
finding
be
it
bad
hard.
for your boat engines.
Yeah, well, they're finding it difficult. It's a serious problem that we need solutions to, and there are solutions. And but the big
So what is
problem
the
with the
solution? I mean,
solutions.
what are some of the
Well,
solutions to it?
non-chemical fertilizers. Go back to our organic non-chemical fertilizers is a major one. Number two, fix the sewer systems. The sewage from municipalities and from septic tanks. We have gone way too long not keeping up with our population and um, these systems, keeping these systems in check. At because it's expensive to do things right is
What
always expensive. The true cost is way more than what we've been paying for our municipal sewage systems, our water. We don't pay enough for our water. I hate to say it, but these things that we require the
so
most,
when
we should be paying more for, or we'll pay in the end
are the
with
sewage systems just
no
not?
water.
Yeah.
The way we
So are the
draw
sewage
so much
systems just
water.
not big enough? I mean, did they, because I've seen things where, they build street systems and water supply systems for a certain number of people, and then all of a sudden that number goes way bigger. And now the pipes aren't big enough, and the streets aren't big enough, and there are not enough schools or not enough fire trucks.
There's
Is
not
that
enough storage. It becomes there's not enough storage for the sewage when it rains in particular. And so they just open up the pipes and let it overflow into the waterways. And then that just provides the algae with, uh,
really
Thanksgiving.
like a book? It's a buffet of nutrients for the algae.
Yeah.
And then all that stuff just rolls downstream, right? So if they're in a canal or in a river 5 miles away or 20 miles away from the Gulf or 100 miles away, it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic Ocean.
And then to the Atlantic. It follows the stream and goes all the way to Ireland.
Yeah, the old saying, yeah, as the old saying, shit runs downhill.
Yeah, but then it goes north.
And so I'm sure that's what it's doing. It's just going downstream.
Yeah.
Oh, with the trade winds and the current.
The Gulf Stream.
So that's got to then that gets into our tuna and all. Yeah, it gets into all these fisheries. I guess is that the right word?
Yeah.
Where commercial
Everything
fishermen
that
are
goes
out
in the
either
yeah,
trying to do
everything that
oyster.
goes in I'm sorry. Everything that goes in the Gulf ends up in the Gulf Stream, crosses the Atlantic Ocean to Northern Europe countries. I'm sure we get our share from other places too. So, it's a big circle.
As far as you know, does Europe do the same thing with synthetic fertilizers, and are they doing the same thing to their waterways? I would
I,
imagine China is for sure.
I know there are some countries that are a lot cleaner than ours that regulate um, toxic waste going into their waterways. Florida, here we are, just we're a small country in itself. I think we're number 14 in the world as far as
Yeah.
income, but for a state, and almost totally surrounded by water, and we flush everything into the waterways. It's pretty third world. If this was happening in a third world country, I think um, some of the nonprofit environmental groups would be on top of it. But for some reason, here in the USA, it's not a problem.
But it is a problem. I mean, it's called now.
Yeah, but
It's
it's not a
everywhere. You can't
problem.
deny it. It's again, the canals and the tributaries and the rivers. I've looked at some of these canals and even these harbors in Florida,
Yeah,
and I just can't believe what I'm seeing in terms of. So
I
you
know.
talked about a minute ago the
Oh,
the
but I
system
wanted to
of the
tell you,
sewage system, and I say the word. Go ahead.
I wanted to tell you that I did write a lot of people in a lot of different groups, and like Greenpeace, and it was like all I got was crickets. Just not a response.
What'd you say to him that made him so mad?
Oh, I didn't make them mad. They just ignored my
What
inquiry
did you?
to see if they could help with the issues we were having in Florida with all the animals and marine life dying. That I guess they wouldn't touch it.
Why do you think that is?
Political, um, across the board. Um, I don't know. More people
I mean,
need
are
to
you
know
so when you
what's
say
going on.
political? I want to ask you. Do you think a lot of it's just being swept under the rug and ignored and not discussed because it's complicated and they don't have an answer and or they don't want to know the answer, they can't afford the answer.
They can't afford the answer. It's
But we
all
were
about
talking
money.
about
It's
sewer. I
always
mean,
about money.
you so you and I were talking a minute ago or earlier when we were getting ready for this about saltwater intrusion and what that's doing. Talk to me. Talk us a little bit about saltwater intrusion and what the ramifications of that are and what that means for us,
Yeah.
because it sounds like something you can't even see. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it, but it's happening.
Right.
What is that, and what's going on with it? What's
Well,
going to happen to us because of it?
we have this beautiful state, and we have all this beautiful fresh water underneath us. And at the rate we are drawing the water out, it is not being replenished. A lot of the reason is because the land is covered with buildings and streets, etc. So the aquifer is not being refurbished or replenished and from fresh water. Instead, it's drawing salt water in from below the water table so that the salt water is slowly coming into the aquifer, taking up the space that all the water that is being drawn out occupied. It's the circle of life or the circle of water. What comes up leaves room for something else. And at the rate we're going, I have to inquire to how many years there are left of fresh water. But we do see we will see the need for desalinating salt water for fresh water in the future. Which in some cases salt water is great. It's very healing if you can separate it out so that you got good salt water to take a bath in, but you have good fresh water that's not salted to drink. But yeah, that's probably out of all the problems. I would think that the saltwater intrusion is the number one problem that Floridians will face in the future. Um, the the lack of marine life. Florida will go on, but the lack of fresh
So the
water.
marine life. I mean, is that a
What?
so? Well, I was going to say the marine life. My question was, is that I would think that has to do with some commercial fishing and just the commercial aspect of, I guess, fisheries. I know it's educational and entertaining from a vacation standpoint to see the manatees and stuff, but we don't eat manatees, but we sure do eat fish and oysters, and we got a big fleet of commercial fishing boats all around the state and in the Gulf. And I
They're
think you and I
slowly
talked
leaving
about, or you
though.
shared with me, that a lot of those commercial fishermen,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
leaving.
they're leaving because they can't make
Yeah,
a living, right? There's
yeah. Well, they have to go so far offshore to catch
and
anything
so
for their customers.
which is, I'm sure, makes it more expensive, and more fuel, more labor, more broken boats, and all of the above. But when
Yeah.
we go back to the saltwater intrusion, uh, so if where do most cities get their fresh water? Because I don't think of Florida as having a bunch of surface lakes, whereas I think I think of some states and areas, these gigantic reservoirs that they pump out of. Um, but I don't think of Florida as having a bunch of surface water. So are they pumping all this water from the aquifer for city water supplies?
Probably both. A little, all the above. They really do pull from the rivers, and they have reservoirs to hold it in. Um, some places they cannot take from their aquifer anymore. Some places they can't take from the rivers anymore. The algae is taken over.
So I mean, I spent a lot of years in the water treatment business on the periphery of that. I mean, anytime you have to filter something else out of the system, that just costs a lot more money. It's a whole nother plant or another portion of the water treatment plant. And that just it gets super expensive. Even pumping out of the aquifers, I know some towns in Texas and Oklahoma and South Dakota, they pump from the Agualula. I think it's Agualula water aquifer. But now that's becoming very heavy in salt content as well. So are you saying that the aquifers in Florida are now just getting replaced, the fresh water, with salt water that they're sucking in from underneath the aquifer?
Well, I really need to say that I am definitely
Then what
no
are the cities
expert
doing
on
about
any
that?
of these subjects.
Are there systems?
I'm seriously not an expert on any of this. These are all just
Say
things that
that again,
I
please.
have read, and I'm just kind of like regurgitating. And I sure welcome anyone to please correct me on any of these, anything I say that is incorrect. But we had problems with our freshwater supplies in Florida. We have problems with what we're doing with the water we have that we're getting rid of and the sewage. And it all stems from um, fertilizers and sewage. I mean, those are the two main problems. And our solutions, we need to get off of the chemical fertilizers. And the sewage part is going to be very expensive to repair. But there's countries in the world, and some of them you might think of as third world countries. Boy, they do a beautiful job of getting rid of their sewage, their dirty water. A lot of some places even burn it, and then they use filters that make the air coming out of these incinerators cleaner than our air. So there are things to do to make it right, but it's not cheap. You can't give your water away. It's such a vital resource. And when you do, you end up like some condominiums that can't afford to rebuild after they uh, have not been maintaining them.
Oh yeah, deferred maintenance is
Yeah,
doesn't cost you a penny until it reaches up and bites you in the ankles.
that's a good term for what we've done. We've deferred maintenance on our sewage systems in
Yeah,
Florida.
yeah. Well, I don't have that much experience down in Florida, but other than in Naples and Fort Myers and Tampa,
That's where I'm
and
from.
um, but yeah, you're the water girl. So, have we talked about red tide? We really didn't. I don't understand it. Can you help me understand red tide?
Well, as far as I've learned, red tide
What do we think
is,
causes it?
yeah, it's an organism that lives, that they say has been off of Florida um, since the first explorers were there. Um, it's called Carina brevis is the name of the organism. And back when it was discovered, they say that it was not found anywhere else in the world, which is not true today. Carina brevis causes red tide havoc in a lot of places now. But she's a creature that goes away for a while, and then and I tend to think that she exists in a submarine spring in the Gulf where she gets nutrients that bubble up and keep her alive until there's a major
Sure.
spill on shore, or Lake Okeechobee gets opened up, and all the nutrients from the lake come to the beach, and then Carina brevis just slowly swims towards it and just starts a feast frenzy. And she grows and she blooms and sends out toxins that kill more creatures. She absorbs oxygen out of the water. I mean, this is my understanding of what goes on. And she just kills and eats and kills and eats until there's nothing left to kill. And then she just slowly backs off and creeps back into her little cave somewhere, some submarine spring, and gets real small and is able to survive off of it for a time again until another uh, accident happens, like a gypstat lets loose and all drains all kinds of radioactive phosphate waste into the uh, Tampa Bay, for instance, and then that seeps out onto the shoreline, and Carina brevis wakes up and heads to the beach and starts eating again and killing. And but what I've noticed lately in these past few years is that there's not as much for her to destroy, not as much marine life to kill, because we were hit so
Because
bad.
they've already killed it.
Well, we were hit so bad in 16 and then 18, 19, and 20 um, that I haven't even heard anybody saying that the marine life is recovering that well from those catastrophic uh, events. So, I mean, that's Carina brevis, anyways. Just another organism like cyanobacteria. I found it interesting that the last big red tide kill we had in 20, between 18 and 21, that the cyanobacteria that came out of the lake water went out into the Gulf. And I don't know who ate who. Did the cyanobacteria eat the Carina brevis, or did Carina brevis eat the cyanobacteria? Some of the scientists say no, one's too small for the other. And I don't know, but the Carina brevis has backed off for the most part the past couple years. She's not been out there.
So that's the red tide, the Carina brevis.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I heard that the odor. I heard that it smells horrible, and you
Hmm.
can't go swimming in it, and it shuts down big sections of the beach. And
Yeah.
is
Makes you
that
cough.
correct, or would you even want to? Oh,
It
it
would
sounds
just make you,
horrible.
it's like
But you
pepper in
mentioned
your
a second
nose.
ago. Go ahead.
It's like pepper in your nose. That's how it feels to me. It's like pepper and makes you cough when when
But
she's
you
there.
wouldn't
And
want to go swimming in it.
we used to. I hate to admit it, but we used to
But
because
would
it
you
was just
swim in
red
that red
tide.
tide water?
Yeah, it was just red tide. It didn't matter. We were there. That's when I was a kid, and you're in Florida, and you're just there for 2 weeks. So hey, go for it. And that's what the tourists do. As far as I know, I don't know what the human condition, if there are any negative human conditions other than it hurts your breathing. Carina brevis, it hurts, makes it hard to breathe, and makes you cough. But as far as it killing or harming humans and medically, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what any physical conditions are unless you're like you have a breathing issues already. And the fish, the way it kills the fish, I believe, is it removes the
So you
oxygen
mentioned
from
a minute
the
ago
water.
about Lake Okeechobee. Second,
Yes.
but I said you mentioned a minute ago about Lake Okeechobee, and I wanted to ask you about that. I think I shared with you earlier when I was growing up. I was on my bucket list to go bass fishing in Lake Okeechobee. It was known for
Yeah.
beautiful,
Remember
huge
Roland Martins? Remember
fighting
Roland
bass.
Martins?
Absolutely, I watched him every Sunday morning
Yeah.
before I went fishing on my own. I used to
Yeah,
love
he
his
had it
show.
going on.
But
Yeah.
what's happened? What's going on with Lake Okeechobee?
Well,
What role does that lake play in our algae blooms and our Gulf issues that we have right now?
well, in the in the recent past, the past 5 years or so, I'm not sure how far back it goes, but the lake has become a cyanobacteria heaven. It's just a place for cyanobacteria to grow, which cyanobacteria is a dangerous bacteria. Um, Anyways, this is a giant lake. It's like the fourth largest lake within the United States, and it can be a half covered in cyanobacteria. And then we get big rains, and the Army Corps of Engineers has to open up the gates and let the water out of the lake so that it doesn't burst its dam. And so they let all this water out of the lake. It goes out the lake, out the river, the Caloosahatchee River, into the Gulf of Mexico. And with it goes all that algae. And this algae now seems to be saltwater tolerant, where before, I swear it was only freshwater cyanobacteria, but now it seems to be saltwater tolerant, at least um, in to a certain degree in salinity. It's able to thrive. And then it goes out there, and I don't know who wins, cyanobacteria or Carina brevis. I think cyanobacteria wins in the Gulf. She might have even beat Carina brevis already. I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that question. But the cyanobacteria goes out there, and it's very dangerous. And then it goes in the canals and starts multiplying. It goes into some lakes along the way.
Sure.
Uh, I
I
don't
mean,
know. They can
the,
they can
the
stop
canals would blow my
cyanobacteria.
mind at how thick it can be. And I guess I got the impression that the canals don't have a lot of flow, a high volume of flow through it. So it's not like you can flush it out. It seems like it's kind of stagnant in a lot of these canals. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm right
What's
about that, but
curious to me, what's curious is up in these canals, what's it eating? Well, maybe it's eating the fertilizer runoff.
well, it's
You
got
know,
to be eating the nutrients, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so the the only resolve I see to the Carina brevis and the cyanobacteria is the nutrients it requires to bloom. And that comes from sewage and chemical fertilizers and animal fertilizers. So any runoff from that, and they say a minimum of 25% of the applied fertilizers end up in the waterways, and that's what's feeding them. And I mean, that's millions of tons right there. That's not just a little bit. That's like millions of tons in the state of Florida of fertilizers.
Yeah, the number of tons of fertilizer is it's put out is mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. And what a lot of people don't realize is that most of that fertilizer comes from overseas, so we don't even make it in this country. But there's you were telling me that there's one big fertilizer plant in Florida that's kind of been a bad boy. Um, I forget, is that the one you call the gyp stacks? That's what fails
Oh,
and runs down into the water.
yeah. As far as fertilizers in our country, the number one fertilizer company in the United States is in Central Florida, in an area that we call the Bone Valley, and it's called the Bone Valley because it is the boneyard for the inland sea, the ancient seas that were underneath Florida before it became dry land. And it's they are excavating this land and digging up the phosphate with these giant diggers, and that's a whole industry that it would take. We could cover that in a couple hours probably, but yeah, our number one fertilizing company in the United States is
Wow.
right there in Florida, and it draws
And so they're
105.
just digging holes in the ground.
Yeah, and then they make fertilizer, and they draw 100. They're permitted to draw 105. Last count I saw was 105 million gallons of fresh water from the aquifer per day, and that's a lot of water. 105 million gallons per day. And I always, well, where do they put all that water? What, well, they use that water to
Yeah, what do they
clean the
do with
rock.
it? What the hell do they do with all that water?
They use it to clean the rock and separate out all the chemicals. And I mean, this is very ABC, but, and then the waste, they make fertilizers and all kinds of other chemicals. Um, I know they used to make pull the uranium out. I'm not sure they do that anymore, but then they take all this radioactive phosphate waste and they put it on what's called a gyp stack, which it looks like a giant landfill, but it has a liner, and that has a 30-year lifespan. And anyways, they fill this giant container with radioactive phosphate waste. And you imagine
Like a like a
that's
big commercial roof kind of thing, or pool liner.
yeah, because it's so dangerous. There's nothing else in the world they can do with it. In
Well, I
Florida,
would
we don't.
imagine the first 30 years are pretty easy, but when you have to replace that liner, yeah,
No, there's no replacing it.
nobody's going to want
It
to do that.
they have accidents. They tear and then they empty and dump into the aquifer, and then they fill it with cement and put another piece, patch it, and then they fill the um, gyp stack again.
So what do they do with 100 million gallons of water?
They're
I mean,
just making
I'm just thinking,
fertilizer.
I dropped a 1 gallon jug on my kitchen floor the other day. Well, what do they do with the water? They use
Yeah,
100 million
100 million.
gallons to process their stuff a day.
It's
What do
big
they? It
business,
has to go somewhere.
Tim. It's
Are
big
they
business.
injecting it back into the soil? Are
And
they
they're
injecting it
floating
back
it.
into the?
Well, I take that back. one of the old plants, one of the old plants on Tampa Bay, there that which Tampa Bay has two gypstacks on Tampa Bay and Piney
Okay.
Point. Everybody probably has heard of Piney Point. Anyways, uh, that's a phosphate um, waste con- man-made container to hold it, and they had an accident. And actually, they've had a couple accidents, and they've had a couple times where they had to release the water purposefully into Tampa Bay. But it's just big business, and they are almost. I would imagine they probably hope we can fix all the other problems so that the the planet can handle their problems. If we fixed all our other problems, maybe their problem wouldn't be so bad. They can get away with it. So,
So you wrote a book, Wanda. Tell us about your book.
oh yes. Well, I didn't. I
I think it's book.
we there were 12 of us that were writing, that wanted to write a book. 12 of us that volunteered, and um, when it got down to it, I said, let's go to print. Everybody turn in uh, your chapters, and we'll take it and we'll get it edited and take it to print. And we ended up with 3 chapters that were complete. And so I we hired a company, and I had it edited and printed, and it's called The Short Story of What's Killing Florida. And it pretty much covers the bases that we've talked about here, although there's 12 issues. And I think today we've just kind of chewed on 4 of them. And that's the book, Short Story What's Killing Florida. Anybody wants a free copy, I'd be happy to email one to you in PDF format. And if you'd like to hold one in your hands, if you're that kind of person that likes to hold a book in their hands, it's available on Amazon and other great book suppliers. It's $9.11 for a reason. That's the
And it's
book.
oh yeah, 911. But you can get that on Amazon, right?
Yes.
I think I saw it on Amazon when I was kicking around for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty interesting
So the
story.
short story of what's killing Florida.
Stories. Yeah,
Oh,
three
I've read
short
the book, and
stories.
I loved it.
Yeah, if you don't know
But the
anything,
title of the book, the short story.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a short book. It's not very thick, but it's an introduction to what's killing Florida, more or less. And
Like a
Tim,
primer to get people curious about this stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So Tim, can you tell us about your solution for the fertilizer issues, the over fertilizer issues in Florida? Don't you have something you can share with us about that?
Well, I started a company and I call it Worm Turf. I kind of came to me in a composition of dreams and experiences, and they date back to my childhood, really. My mother always had worms and bats and bees, and she and I did a lot of organic gardening growing up. But to roll forward, I started a worm farm, and I recognized and tested and proved that if I raise worms and feed them good grain, not food waste or animal waste, then what the worms produce is pretty amazing nutrients, and it's really microbes and fungi and protozoays that I've been able to sort of steer their production based on what I feed them. And so now what I do is I don't sell worms. I sell microbes and fungi to golf courses. And it would work on your backyard or a cornfield or almost anything that grows. But I focus on golf courses. And what we've proven is that if they'll stop using chemical fertilizer and use natural biology, that the chemical runoff goes away and that the grass looks just as good on the top, but the roots get 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 times bigger, and they hold more water. And the bottom line is, and these golf courses can use half as much water with no chemical runoff, no poison, no applicator license needed, no respirators needed, and it works pretty amazing. But I am going up against and competing with some of the biggest, or the biggest chemical companies on the planet, and they really don't like me being around. And the golf course guys don't really want to make a change because they're sort of risk adverse. But thank goodness we have a lot of really good, I guess I'd call it curious and brave souls that are running golf courses that are making the switch to natural biology because they recognize the the chemical stuff is just not sustainable anymore. I mean, the more chemicals you put on these golf courses, the more water they need. The more water they need, the more chemicals they have to put on there. And so that's what I do. It's called worm turf, and
Hey, I'm just
I'm
curious.
pretty
What
happy
what
with
do
it.
you
I got
feed?
some really happy members.
I'm just curious. What do you feed
So
worms?
I feed my worms. Well, so a lot of people feed them, cow poop or food waste from a restaurant, and or leaf mold from your yard, and that all works good. And worms are amazing; they can survive in almost anything. I mean, worms actually can clean up an oil spill on a beach. That's how well they are, or how well suited they are at processing goofy stuff. But I feed my worms 12 different grains, and then I add like 3 or 4 local grasses depending on where I'm going to ship it to. So for desert customers, I add some desert grasses to the basic grain mix. For East Coast customers, I add East Coast grasses to keep the diversity of the biosphere well rounded and targeted to specific regions. But yeah, it's corn, oats, sunflower seed, barley, canary seed. Boy, I can't even remember the whole recipe now. Um, Wheat, and
Have
then
you
I
ever
grind it. When I feed my worms, I grind it up into flour.
have you ever tried serving
Have I ever what?
cyanobacteria?
Well, kind of yes and no. What we have started doing because of some of the saltwater inclusions or encroachments that we talked about is we have developed we are feeding them saltwater based kelp and algae, and then what we found is now we're producing microbes that love saltwater, and so they're able to process higher salinity water pretty daggum good. And we're continuing to develop our saltwater section. I mean, we have a fish farm inside the worm farm where we feed fish just so that we can get the fish poop, and we're feeding the fish algae and kelp to start to build in salt tolerant bios or microbes, and that's working pretty good. Um, and we did that for Florida, but actually, interesting. The reason we got onto that was because of Lubbock, Texas. I mean, Lubbock, Texas is pumping out of the Agalula aquifer, and they've depleted it. So now they're irrigating their golf courses with essentially salt water, which is killing the grass. So that's what kicked us off into doing salt tolerant and salt loving microbes. So yeah, we haven't fed it red tide yet, um, or some of these algae, but that's definitely what I mean. We're leaning toward doing that, but we're kind of scared too. We don't want to create some special algae farm and let some virus out like the Wuhan virus or like Wuhan, China did. So we're kind of careful about it, but we're aware that when we feed these worms certain things and then the worms process it and digest it, and then expel it on the other end. That what they expel is is so powerful, and it's like the anti of what you fed them, and almost like local honey and allergies or allergy serums. But it's all natural and it's healthy, and I'm pretty proud of it because it works
Yeah,
like a champ.
I heard it's this stuff's like magic. I mean, a lot of organic farmers use it and they don't even feed it until the moon is in the right spot. I mean, it's just like magic from what I hear.
Right. Oh yeah, there's some spirit, yeah, there's definitely some spiritual aspects to it, and I don't take it lightly, and I don't I just don't take it lightly. I love my worms, and um, yeah, and I think there's a lot of solutions or a lot of problems that they can be a solution to. But right now, I focus with it on the water and the water quality and the cost of chemical fertilizer, which is expensive, and it comes from overseas for a large in large part, and it's just killing our food system and our kids and you know our pets and our golf course workers, and we don't even realize it because it's such a slow, insidious poison, really. That not the worms, but the chemical stuff. But yeah, thanks for asking about that. Yeah, so I love the water challenges, and I hate the fact that we have the problems, but I love the challenge, and I think that we just need to make people aware of it, that of what's really going on, because it's not talked about very much. Well, Wanda, so we can get your book on Amazon, the short story of what's killing Florida, or you'll send them a hand signed copy if they just
I
reach
can
out to
do
you. Where can
that.
they reach you at? What's your
I
email?
can do that. Here's the book. There we go. Big red book, little red book.
Oh, that's nice.
My little red book. But yeah, if
Little
they'd
red
like
book.
me to send them a signed copy, they can just email or at napleswanda@gmail.com, or on Facebook. You can send me a message and I'll be happy to sign a book and send it to you. Or you can get it at Amazon. Or if you want, I'm so happy. I probably send out 1,000 free copies, and I'm happy to send you a free PDF, because it's not about selling books, or it's about fixing the problem in Florida, mending nature, helping her get her foothold back, because she's being devastated down there. And it's, I promise to work on this the rest of my life. So I'm not going anywhere.
Well, and I think, yeah, and just to kind of clear up, I mean, I don't see you out there really being able to solve it with your own shovel or your own backhoe, but your contribution is to make other people aware of it so that they can either change their behavior or
Right.
influence their local decision makers. Or so we're just trying to spread the word here, and I
I'm
appreciate you helping me do
exactly.
that.
I'm in like the third generation of environmental aware people who are trying to make a difference. This is a third generation of people who have been standing on bridges in Florida, standing on the beaches with their signs, um, and it's time to really get everybody to stand together and go up against these problems and fix it. Or if we don't, I don't. What's going to happen? What's it going to look like down there if you
Can't
can't
get
go to the
better,
beach?
got to get worse.
Yeah, what's going to happen if you can't go to the beach? Who wants to live in Florida if you can't go to the beach? If there's if and you can't go fishing
What
because
if you
there's
can't get
nothing to fish
water
for.
into your house?
Yeah, you have no fresh water. Um, what's going to happen? Are we just going to wait until it's too late, and then nobody will be living in Florida? It'll be, a ghost
Right.
state, or they'll
Or
or
that
it'll
everybody will wake up one day and say,
it'll just be a mining state. They'll just be mining it for the sand, for the minerals that are there, oil. There's a lot of good stuff below the surface that the state can be used for, but it
sure.
won't be pretty above ground. What's the future?
Well, that's a scary thought, and I don't want that to happen because I love Florida. Well, again, what I can kind of see is that I've seen this before in other situations where all of a sudden, let's just call him Mayor Jones wakes up and says, "Hey, we have no water. We got to build a desalination plant. We need to build a new wastewater treatment plant, and we're going to need, however many $1 billion, and we need it tomorrow." And then it takes 10 years to build those things, and I just see people wait till the last minute for stuff like this over and over and over. And to your point, you know, the all the people that live down there and rely on it for their leisure or just their primary residence or their business, whether it's agriculture or golf or fishing, if they don't get ahead of this thing, they're going to be in a world of hurt before you know it. Because I don't see this water thing tapering off. I just see it slamming shut. Boom. When they keep pulling from these aquifers, one day the salt levels are going to be so high that they just can't process it anymore. That's what I see.
Yeah. Which way will they go? Do a little preventive, pick up the costs now, or wait
Right.
till it's exorbitant, till
Yeah, and yeah, and change some behavior.
yeah.
We can gradually change some behavior, I think. And we said it earlier. A lot of this stuff starts upstream and rolls down the hill. So, all right, well, Wanda. So everybody, the book is The Short Story of What's Killing Florida. You can get it on Amazon. You can email Wanda. She'll send you one, hand signed, which is very rare. I'm still waiting on mine. All right, everybody. Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Tim Tucker, been a
Catch us
pleasure.
on our next episode where we're going to talk about some other fun water stuff in Florida.
Yeah, and if you have any questions or comments, you want to tell
You
us
too, Wanda.
anything
Thanks for
I
joining.
said that wasn't
Talk to you in a little
exactly
bit.
right, let us know.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.